If I were to marry a beautiful woman whom I love, or if I were to given the good news of having a newborn son, it is less beloved and dear to my heart than to be in the cold, icy night in an army waiting to meet the enemy the next morning. And they say women do not birth people like Khalid ibn al-Walid anymore. That's at least what his leader, Abu Bakr, said about him. Welcome back to the Trails of Steel History podcast, and this time we're going to be talking about the most requested warrior we've ever gotten, Khalid ibn al-Walid, who in my opinion is one of the greatest warriors and military leaders of all time, and especially the greatest during his time. Right, we're talking about like 592 AD to 642, where he died at 50 years old. And would you say the same thing?
Yeah, he's up there with the legends, Alexander, Hannibal, Napoleon. He's right up there with them, I would say, too.
Yeah, I agree with that. I mean, the things that he was able to do throughout his entire military career was insane, actually. Like, not just defeating who he defeated and how he did it, but the time. Like, right, battle after battle, win after win, victory after victory, and annihilating his enemies so thoroughly was a testament to how great he was as a leader.
And he did it all in a span of less than a decade. He moved all the way from Iraq, all the way through Syria, up into southern Turkey in less than a decade.
Yeah, this is all in Arabia, which was called back then. He was born in Mecca, and he fought for the group in Mecca called the Quraysh, who opposed the Islamic prophet Muhammad from 625 to 627. He then later fought for Muhammad from 627 to 632, so like 5 years or so. Then fought for the legendary Rashidun Caliphate, which is the massive expansion of Islam across the Middle East, from 632 to 638. Roughly around 9 years service as a warrior and a military leader. And what he was able to do during that time was crazy. I mean, Khalid was one of the greatest military commanders of all time. He rose from the desolate lands of chaotic tribal wars, led an inexperienced army on an undefeated campaign against the powerful Byzantine Empire and the Sassanian Empire, as well as helped unify much of Arabia under Islam, still kind of unified 1400 years later. They said two things Khalid has never experienced, at least to my knowledge: betrayal and defeat.
Very true, yeah. He never experienced either one.
And how rare that is for any military leader is insane.
And the even crazier part about this is he lasted, now in those times, life expectancy was very low, and in the line of work Khalid was involved with, to make it to 50 years old as an undefeated general against two of the most powerful empires of the day, absolutely remarkable.
Yeah, and there was a time where he fought both of them at once, where they teamed up with each other against him.
Yeah, the Rashidun Caliphate was fighting a two-front war against the Byzantines and the Persians, and even at times allying in battle, both.
Yeah, exactly. And even before that, they had to deal with a lot of rebels after Muhammad died. And, Khalid did a really good job of, dispelling all of them and unifying Arabia again under one Islamic state, essentially. I mean, there's always going to be rebels here and there, but he did by far the best efforts of, unifying as much as he could.
The very interesting thing to understand about the specific time period here, just before the rise of Khalid as the legendary general, is when you look at the whole layout of the 7th century, very late 5th century, but early 7th century Byzantine, the Sassanid Persian Empire. Now, Sassanid is the dynasty that ruled over the Persian Empire, but it's essentially the same thing.
Okay.
So, Byzantines ruled the Balkans, Turkey, the Levant, which is Israel, Palestine, Syria, all the way down basically into the Sinai Peninsula, which is just east of Egypt. And then the Sassanid Empire ruled over Iraq, Iran, the Caucasus, South Caucasus, into Central Asia. Now, when you look at Arabia in this specific time period, they were all very, very, it was much tribal warfare going on. There was no unification. It was completely economically, politically, and even militarily fractured.
Yeah.
So what you're seeing here now is there's two major tribes that play a role here in the Arabian states during this period are the Lakhmids and the Ghassanids. Now the Ghassanids, these were both buffer states to the Byzantine, because what the Byzantines were doing, and even the Persians were doing, was they were doing a divide and conquer tactic amongst the Arabian states to fully inquire all of Arabia. Now, modern day Yemen and Oman back in those days in the 600s AD, this all happened between 600 AD and 628. This whole Persian, Byzantine, Arabian conflict, just before the Rashidun Caliphate became powerful. The two areas today that we know as Yemen and Oman were known in the day as Mazun and Himyar. Now, the Persians had control of this. So the bad thing, what's going on here, when you look at things from the Arabian perspective, they're getting swallowed from the Byzantine side and from the Persian side, both south and north, and they're completely politically fractured and militarily. So The only thing that can save them is they need a hero, and they need someone that can unify them, because that's the only way they can make it out of this envelopment that the Byzantines and the Persians are swelling into their territory. So they need a hero in this, and that's where Muhammad comes into play.
Yeah, Muhammad comes into play because they have all different kind of leaders with different tribes, right? And they all want to be the big leader of that conquers all the different tribes. The big two cities during this time to remember are Mecca and Medina, right? These two cities specifically were a big conflict. Once Muhammad rose up in Medina with the following of Islam, and then in Mecca, they had a lot of pagans, right? So it became a big religious war, essentially, throughout this whole thing.
Yeah, they were also very religiously fractured. You had Christianity swooping in, Judaism, and then you had the old Arab pagan beliefs.
Yep, exactly. And in the beginning, it's all pagan versus the Muslims, and then after that were the Persians pagan too?
Yes.
Okay. Then it continues there, and then once they get to the Byzantine, then they start fighting a lot of the Christians, the Muslims versus the Christians, and that kind of war. But the thing about Khalid started as a pagan, right? And Khalid was in Mecca. He was from the Quraysh tribe as well, as was Muhammad at the time. But Muhammad, the whole story about Muhammad leaving was, he was developing the religion of Islam, the following of Islam. He came back to Mecca, but it conflicted with the polytheistic ideals. And therefore, the Meccans didn't want any part of that. So they were expelling a lot of the Muslims. And then essentially, Muhammad came back to, attack Mecca. And he started... The thing about Mecca is it's a big merchant city, right? Merchants coming from all over. Different people live there, not just, Arabic people, even Christians and even some Jews and stuff like that. They all live there.
Yeah, Mecca was basically almost, you could say, I guess, a melting pot for many different races, languages, ethnicities. And what it was just across the Red Sea there, you had the Empire of Aksum, which was a very powerful, rich empire that lasted almost 1,000 years in East Africa. And then you had, of course, the Byzantines doing trade there, and the Persians doing trade, and even other Arabic tribes that were doing trade there. So it was very much a melting pot in terms of economy.
Yes, and they had a lot of the caravans, and Muhammad was targeting the caravans first, right? And that's a lot of camels, especially, got killed during all these battles, and they would even say sometimes even more than men did, humans did. But there was a battle that happened before Khalid took position first. There was a battle called the Battle of Badr. And it was said that 25 of Khalid's cousins died in this battle as Muhammad targeted the caravans to stop supplies and trades, right? A few duels happened between officers and stuff like that, but the Muslims won and gained a large amount of resources and new followers. Every single time Muhammad wins a battle, he gains new followers, right? Even in defeat sometimes, he gains new followers. And this is like bad news for the Meccans, right? Good news for the Muslims, bad news for the Meccans, and people, following Muhammad along the way. So with so many leaders and relatives, being killed at the Battle of Badr, Khalid was now positioned to command the right flank of a 3,000-man strong Meccan army as he advanced upon Muhammad out of revenge at the Battle of Uhud. Now, Uhud is like a mountain, right?
Correct.
And this happened in Medina, or close to Medina. So the Meccans came out, they approached Medina, they're fighting right outside of there, and motivated by vengeance, according to the early Islamic historian Ibn Ishaq, even some women were brought to the battle by the Meccans to strengthen morale. They would sing and in a way that would build morale.
And you see this even later on. Even the widows of some of these fallen soldiers even get involved in battles later on.
Which is really interesting how that works,
Yeah, you see that devotion.
Yeah. And the Muslims at the time had 1,000 troops positioned at Mount Uhud, but a chief of theirs, Abdallah ibn Ubay, defected with 300 men away from Muhammad because of disagreements with battle tactics. So they had this whole, strategy on how to tackle the Meccan army. And Abdallah wanted to defend Medina from within it, right? He wanted to defend from inside and not engage the Meccan army. But the young, brave soldiers and Muhammad wanted to come out of the city and meet the Meccan army head on. So because they went with Muhammad's plan, Abdallah fled with 300 men. And it might not sound like a lot, but Muhammad only had 1,000. So 300 men is cutting it in a third, or by a third.
Right.
So it's a big loss for Muhammad's army.
Yeah, it's a big chunk for sure.
Right, and they say different motives were also recorded as to why Abdallah did this. It depends on, what record you read, but it's going to be for a lot of different motives throughout Khalid's entire, history. But this was a big blow to Muhammad nonetheless. And the Quraysh now approaches Muhammad's men, and Muhammad purposely positioned himself to have the mountain behind him and also at an angle, on his right. And he positioned archers on a hill to his left, right? He positioned 50 archers, and he did this so he always had an opportunity to retreat backwards up the mountain, knowing that the Meccan army have a lot of cavalry. That's usually what they focus a lot of their battle tactics on.
And the interesting thing about that is now he has that. Now, for anybody who studies military history and military strategy, what you're seeing here now, he has the mountain to his back and to his left, essentially. Now, why you do this
to his right.
To his right. To his right. So what's happening here now is what that does is now that cuts off any attack from the rear now. Yeah. So now he's secure from the rear, and as we all know, most military disasters comes from being outflanked from the rear. So now he's in a very, very advantageous position. One, he's got his men up high, and two, he's got the high elevation towards his back so nobody can take him from behind. So it's very intelligent.
And also with the archers on his left, the flanks are kind of covered, so the only way to really engage Muhammad's forces are head on. They have to go right after them. And that's what the Meccan army did. The Meccan army had no other opportunity to, attack in any other kind of angle, and the Muslims were actually holding them off by hurling stones at them. So, in another effort to get some kind of victory in this, a small victory here, the Meccan flag bearer set out a challenge for a duel with women singing, to build up morale during the whole thing. And Muhammad's cousin came out and easily defeated the flag bearer, which I never knew flag bearers knew how to fight, which is pretty funny. Muhammad's cousin defeated him with a single strike very easily, and the flag hit the ground. Now, with the flag on the ground, the bearers, brothers and sons, came out to retrieve it, but were cut down one by Muhammad's relatives in duels, showing that, in duels, the Muslims are definitely superior to at least the flag bearers and his brothers and sons during the time. So, from the flag bearers dueling with the motivation of the motivated Muslims, and the battle continued, the Muslims were winning at almost every turn at this point, right? The main forces kept getting pushed back from the stones. The left cavalry wing were losing to Muhammad's archers. Muhammad's archers were defeating one of the cavalry flanks, which was also including Khalid, right? But then the archers messed up. So keeping composure in the sight of victory is just as important as keeping composure in the sight of defeat, because the archers left their position, or at least some of them did, and they came down the hill to go to the camp to take resources.
And they were commanded not to leave.
They were commanded, specifically by Muhammad, strictly to not leave their position no matter what, and they did.
And this goes back, and I know in the past episodes, you guys have heard me mention this before. We go back to the art of war. Sun Tzu always says, whenever you have high ground, don't ever let go of high ground, because that's where all your momentum is up high. And these guys, and it's another thing too, Sun Tzu says about not following the commander's orders. He says, if the commander's orders are given and they're given clearly, but they're not obeyed, that's the fault of the subordinate, not the general. And so the subordinates here, normally under normal conditions, would have been very heavily punished.
Exactly. And who notices this? Who noticed the opening on that flank? Khalid.
The one man you don't want to go up against.
The worst possible enemy to do that to. Khalid spotted the opening and rushed through Muhammad's flank, destroying the few archers that stayed on the hill, and overran Muhammad's men, encircling them. This is actually a common tactic that, Khalid does to a lot of his enemies that you're going to see later as well. So Khalid's attack created an opening for the Meccan army to also swarm the Muslims, who started to retreat through the mountain. Now, this is, to their advantage, because the horses can't come up the mountain. So they were, allowed to leave, essentially. And some of them, fled the battle back to Medina, but most of the fleeing men were also slain as well before they were able to go up the mountain. And the battle ended as the Meccan cavalry could not advance up the slopes, of course. They left back, to Mecca and didn't engage to even invade Medina at all, which leaves a debate as to who actually won the battle, right? Some historians think that it was the Meccans that won the battle because they didn't suffer as much casualties and they forced the enemy to retreat. But then some historians say that the Meccans lost the battle because they didn't ultimately fulfill their goal or achieve their goal, and that is killing Muhammad and his followers. So it's like that sort of thing,
If those soldiers would have stayed on top of the mountaintop and just kept hurling projectiles, there's a very high chance that Muhammad could have won that battle.
Yeah, very high chance, because they had no opening. They were getting pushed back at every turn.
Yeah, Muhammad's troops had high ground, Khalid was down below, and you don't fight uphill battles. You normally lose those. So.
Exactly. And the Meccans believed that their quote-unquote victory would discourage the followers of Islam, but it in fact strengthened the followers in a way. The Muslims believed the reason for their defeat was because the archers disobeyed Muhammad. And the path of victory that God gave them, or they believed that God gave them, therefore failing like some sort of divine test, right? So it was like, oh, of course, we lost. So the strength of faith in Islam actually did not dwindle at all from this loss.
Yeah, it was seen as a test of faith rather as a defeat.
Exactly. Yep. And in 628, Muhammad marched to Mecca for pilgrimage. This is actually a very, very interesting story. He was said to have, him and his people were said to have dressed as pilgrims, and multiple sources also conflict as to whether they had weapons or not. No idea. And Khalid actually came out hearing this news. He came out with 200 horsemen spearheading towards Muhammad. Upon the sights of Mecca's greatest warrior approaching, he got word of this. Muhammad detoured to a more difficult path toward Mecca. Right, he didn't want to go through Khalid, of course. Even if it's a more difficult and a weird path to take, alternative, let's go this way. And he actually does succeed into getting into Mecca, and he doesn't attack. He actually just seeks. I don't know what pilgrimage is.
More of like a peaceful, religious journey.
Okay, that makes sense. And he's in Mecca. Khalid retreats back to the city, and now negotiations start to happen with the Meccans and Muhammad. Right, so they know he's there, and they start to talk to him. And they agree on a peace treaty. Very strange from the Meccans, by the way. They agree in a peace treaty with Muhammad between the cities of Mecca and Medina that this peace treaty was to be kept for 10 years. Right, the peacetime was important in allowing the Muslims to gain more followers from Mecca, but it was agreed on that any converts would not leave unless they were granted permission by their guardians, right? And Khalid converted as well during this time. So this confused me. Why would the Meccans, after winning a battle against Muhammad, why would they agree upon a peace treaty like this that would give Muhammad enough time to gain more followers on his side, right? Because Muhammad doesn't need to go through battles in order to, gain essentially a stronger military.
Well, what this does is this 10-year peace treaty. Well, what this really does is this gives Muhammad enough time to build up an army, basically, and build up followers as he's moving along with his journey. And so the only way I can see it really happening is him just basically his build-up arc, if you want to say. It's a build-up for him.
Yeah, exactly. And it comes back to hurt the Meccans later. Right, because Muhammad becomes very powerful, and the Arabs mostly had to pick a side in Mecca, right? Join the Muslims or join the Quraysh. The Quraysh tribe is the one that pretty much rule over Mecca. There were other tribes that were in conflict with each other and caused a breach in the treaty prematurely. The Banu Bakr aligned with the Quraysh, and the Banu Quza aligned with the Muslims. Well, the Banu Bakr sought revenge for their conflict and started attacking Banu Quza during peace times, even though Quraysh were And here's the interesting thing. The Quraysh tribe were actually supplying the Banu Bakr with weapons behind their leader's back. Right, they weren't supposed to be doing this.
See, and this is the interesting thing about wars is being familiar at all times. And this is why I say intelligence, scouts, spies are super important, because you understand the makeup of all your allies, neighbors, and possibly even enemies or people that you're neutral with. You have to know what's going on at all times.
Yeah, exactly. And this news reached Muhammad about the breach, who now has stipulations for the Quraysh's violation of the peace treaty. A leader of the Quraysh met with Muhammad to renegotiate, but was rejected. Even his own daughter, who was married to Muhammad, by the way, turned her back to him by calling him an unclean polytheist when he tried to sit on the carpet. Right? He returned home with bad news about the failed negotiations and his daughter, and he sees the influence that Muhammad has, right? He speaks to him, he speaks to Umar, who's one of his relatives, speaks to Abu Bakr as well, and they all reject his negotiations with them. And Khalid's first battle with Muhammad commences at the Battle of Mu'tah against the Byzantine Empire. So this is actually pretty interesting. It's the first time they fight against the Byzantine until they do it much later, right? And this occurred east of the Jordan River in what would be modern-day Iraq. The purpose was, they say, to take resources, as the Persians just retreated after a battle with the Byzantine, right? So the Persians and the Byzantine are constantly at conflict with each other. They're right next to each other on I think it's the western border of the Persians is where the Byzantine Empire is. And they're always fighting with each other. And this Battle of Mu'tah, where Khalid participated in, was very difficult. It just shows how strong the Byzantine Empire was. It was so daunting, actually, that even Khalid thought about withdrawing, as he was led to lead the army for the first time after seeing 3 of his leaders die in the same battle. So the top 3 guys in supremacy, essentially, they all die, and now it's Khalid who has to lead for the first time. And it said that Khalid broke through 9 of his swords in this intense battle through clashes, but he improvised and avoided any pitched battle to gain victory.
You imagine that, having 9 different blades break on you in the middle of battle.
And this is where they said that Khalid was given the nickname by Muhammad, the Sword of Allah, or the Sword of God, right? And I wonder how much it has to do with the fact that he broke through 9 swords and he still came out and won.
Yeah,
right?
basically that I guess if you want to say that symbol of strength.
Yeah, and this, showed his reputation throughout the Muslim army and also any of his enemies, right? Khalid was someone to be concerned with if he's on the battlefield. And you're going to see later that, if you were facing Khalid on the battlefield, it was almost inevitable destruction if you wanted to go that way. And Khalid was actually very ruthless during his whole reign.
Oh, yeah, very, very ruthless.
Yeah, and after that, Muhammad launched an attack on Mecca with 10,000 soldiers during Ramadan, which was the largest Muslim army assembled by that point. And Muhammad chose not to attack the Meccans by surprise, though. Interesting enough, he lit fires to let the Meccans know that he was coming. The reason why he did this was to allow the Meccans to, decide on what they got to do here.
Yeah, basically, it's a threat, essentially. It's like, look, you stick around, you're going to see trouble. If you leave, you'll be safe.
Yeah, and Muhammad, even if it's like, not to destroy the enemy and do all that, like just defeating the enemy and converting them was essentially a victory for him, right? He doesn't need to absolutely annihilate the enemy unless he has to do it, right? Converting to his religion is essentially like a big part of his whole campaign. And if they're dead, he can't do that.
Right, yeah.
So what happens is Muhammad's uncle, who's in Mecca, pleads with the leader to surrender to Islam or they will all be destroyed. That same leader from the Quraysh that negotiated before, he came out to meet with Muhammad again, but this time for an ultimate purpose. He surrendered to Muhammad and saw the large army march towards Mecca, proof of the destruction that was waiting for him if he didn't do it. He never saw a Muslim army of these numbers. He never saw a military that looked this strong. He saw Khalid and everything. Like, this is a lot more menacing than what he had to deal with, what the Meccans had to deal with before.
And this goes back to what I had mentioned earlier about the whole layout of the whole Arabian state pre-Islam. Was most battles were fought with extremely small numbers because it was so fractured. So now when you see this enormous army emerge, it's like, whoa, where did all these men come from? We're not used to this enormous amount of numbers. So to see thousands and thousands of Arab soldiers on the field is like, this has never been done before in this part of the world.
Exactly.
So it's extremely terrifying to see that.
Yep. Especially, Muhammad didn't have like he wasn't like the leader of this giant tribe like the Quraysh before, or any of the others around the region. He developed his own.
Yeah, all of these tribes, as I mentioned, were all fractured.
Yeah.
It was all division, and nobody was united.
Yeah, and this leader of the Quraysh tribe was told to command his men to not act aggressive against any Muslims as they enter the city. But the Quraysh soldiers laughed at their former leader now, right? And they positioned themselves to defend the city. Muhammad responded by commanding Khalid to take the right flank, as always, and charge the city. As well as some of his other powerful warriors on the other sides of the city, Khalid bashed his way through in what became the takeover of the city of Mecca under the Islamic rule. The Muslims were told not to kill anyone unless it was for self-defense. The Muslims destroyed the pagan statues, and Khalid would even kill those worshipping at the sites, which is a very common thing he did.
Yes.
He killed a lot of people that weren't soldiers for many different reasons. There was a point where Muhammad even told Khalid to convert the people at the settlement of Bani Khuzaimah, but because they couldn't articulate their intentions when Khalid was there, right, he thought they were playing a trick on him. But they even said their accents alone made Khalid think that they're playing some games here.
And
right?
The interesting thing about Khalid's way of waging war, and you'll see in his later campaigns also, is before he invades or attacks an enemy, what he does is he tells them this: pay the jizya tax and bow to Islam, or face the consequences.
Yep.
So even as ruthless as he is, he does offer that chance of just retreat and then fight under our, basically pay homage to us, or we completely destroy you.
Yeah, and you have to be very thorough with your words here, because
Khalid made it very, very clear what he wanted to do.
Yeah, and because he thought that these essentially pagans were not speaking clearly to him for him to understand, he just slaughtered them, right? He just slaughtered them. And even some were taken as captives that he also thought about killing, but it is also believed that Khalid acted out of revenge, right? There's some different accounts. He acted out of revenge for the killing of his uncle by this tribe in the past, so he had this history with them. There's a whole thing different records about why he did this, but Khalid's ruthless nature was too much for even some of his own men, who started disobeying him, and they knew that it was not what Muhammad wanted. This cruelty reached Muhammad, who pleaded, this is what they say. They said that he pleaded with God for his innocence because of what Khalid is doing, right?
Wow.
So it shows it's hard to control this guy.
Yeah, Khalid is not one really to listen to a higher general above him. He just made his own move.
Many times.
Oh, many occasions.
Even Muhammad being his leader, Abu Bakr being his leader, Umar being his leader, he always wanted to act independently with what he thought was right? Even though he followed Islam, of course, but he still has that, I don't know what it is, like, killing captives, killing anyone who surrendered, even telling them, if you surrender to me, I won't hurt you. He would still kill them, which he has done many times.
And this brings us to the point now where we look at Khalid's personality and mentality. You're seeing that Khalid is this, he truly is a warmonger. He is this, because he's actually, amongst the pious Muslims, he's not famous at all. They are actually against him because of how ruthless and how much of a warmonger he was. So you're seeing this. And Khalid, I think a lot of this mentality came from his success in battle. This happens a lot in human nature when you're successful at something. Yeah. Even if you're not necessarily a fan of what you're doing, if you're successful with it, you build a fondness for it. And Khalid just had this momentum after momentum. He just kept building momentum, and it was this drive, this unlimited, infinite amount of drive that just kept him going.
Absolutely. He belonged on the battlefield, right? Even that first quote that I read in the beginning, he said even, if he was married or had the good news of a newborn son, he'd rather be on an icy cold night on the battlefield waiting for his enemy. That's just who he was.
And again, I relate that to what everybody used to say about Napoleon back when he was around. It's very similar. Mm-hmm. He can't rule in times of peace. He is a man of war.
Yeah. And when Khalid started doing this, he was killing captives and killing people that he was supposed to convert. Muhammad was very angry about it too. He actually scolded Khalid because Muhammad intends to convert the enemies and follow, right? But Khalid is not giving them a chance, right? He just kills them. But then Muhammad later dies in 632 after most of Arabia at the time converted to Islam. So they have Mecca, they have Medina. A lot of people convert now under Muhammad specifically, because that's an important detail. His death is debated on. Fever. He was poisoned. He had epileptic seizure. Like, it's debated as to how he died. But Muhammad's cousin, Abu Bakr, takes over as the new leader, or what they would call the caliph, right?
Yeah, he's the first caliph of the newly established Rashidun Caliphate.
Yes. Now, the Rashidun Caliphate is now essentially beginning. And here are the names that are going to be important to know. Abu Bakr, Umar, and Khalid. Right, those are the big three names to know from here on out.
Umar coming after Abu Bakr.
Umar comes after, yeah, because Abu Bakr doesn't lead. He doesn't lead for too long. He dies after like 2 years.
Yeah, he doesn't last too long.
And Umar specifically, or at least historically, according to a lot of historians, did not like Khalid as much nearly as much as Abu Bakr did.
Right.
Abu Bakr really liked Khalid. Umar not so much. But religiously, there's different angles or different ways they speak about Umar's relationship with Khalid. But just like every nation, when a leader passes, conflict arises for power.
And that's what we see here now. It's, again, when we look back at human nature, you see after the death of Muhammad now, usually in just any nation of the world, you see this power vacuum struggle. You can see it all the time happening in medieval Europe. So after the death of Muhammad, that's where this whole upheaval of many different tribes.
Big rebellion happens. A lot of people want to be the leader. Like, for example, the natives of the city Medina want their own leader. Some of the Muslims wanted Muhammad's other cousin Ali to be the leader, while new converts, including Khalid, agreed with Abu Bakr to be the leader, right? So tribes throughout Arabia broke away from their alliance under one Islamic state under Abu Bakr, right? If it was Muhammad, they would never have broken away.
Yeah, and the other thing you're seeing here now is you're seeing a lot of people trying to basically now they're trying to use that same, now they're proclaiming themselves to be prophets of many different tribes around Arabia. And they're like, okay, no, I'm the prophet now. I do this. Listen to me. I know what I'm talking about. I was given direct divine intervention. And
a lot of people start to say they see divine vision and they're a prophet, and then people start following them, and it's a whole mess going on in Arabia when it comes to the whole religious conflict. And this launched what was called the Ridda Wars, a war against the apostates, or those who abandoned their religion, right? Khalid was given charge to handle the rebels after Abu Bakr's other two top men refused to lead, which is interesting. So these two other guys that are above Khalid, they refused. No, I don't want to deal with the rebels, right? Khalid's like, let me handle them.
Which is very interesting that Khalid, knowing how militarily, even he proved himself already militarily.
Yep.
They put him on third wheel. They're like, I like these other two guys above you. And then to basically say that you're the last choice is it's almost surprising to hear that.
And him stepping up like that, I guarantee, was a reason as to why Abu Bakr initially already saw something in Khalid, because he holds him to very high regard later.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
And Khalid defeated all the leaders of each rebellion tribe, one after the other, with little rest in between. Khalid even defeated and killed others who were claiming to be divine prophets, like someone named Musaylima, I believe it's called, in the city of Yamama, right? And Khalid was doing something very interesting during the time. He was actually launching armies, multiple armies at the same time in different fronts to conflict and fight against these different tribes, which is something that a lot of Arabic leaders during the time did not do. They didn't have any experience in doing that.
No.
So Khalid was gaining experience that no one else had.
Yeah, for sure. Khalid being out there on the field so much, he's gaining followers, experience, and it's just helping him out so much more.
Oh, very easily too. Like, it's just making him a more menacing threat for any of his enemies, the more experience he's getting, right? And it just continues to keep going on. And there was like this one battle that he had against that Musaylima guy that was pretending to be a prophet. He fought them with 4,000 men. The enemy had 4,500. They actually fought pretty well against him, and he was eventually able to rout them and forced them back into a garden for a last stand, which is actually pretty cool. And they called the Garden of Death because of how many of his enemies died there. And he also showed his cruelty by executing any surrendered rebels and married even one of their wives on the same night.
Yeah, see, now that's...
And this wife was named Layla, and actually she was like the closest wife to Khalid, which is pretty funny or pretty interesting, and hearing about Khalid executing the rebels during this whole conflict, he was, killing them after they surrendered. This angered Umar, who was a relative of Muhammad and now the chief aide of Abu Bakr. And Umar requested Khalid to be punished or removed from duty, but Abu Bakr took example from Muhammad before and pardoned Khalid.
Yeah, Abu Bakr was very, very lenient with Khalid.
Yeah.
Umar was more of, and you'll see later on too, of course, Umar was very strict on Khalid, almost like, you need to know, don't do this, don't do that, do this, go here. And Abu Bakr was like, look, Khalid, you do your thing.
Yeah, exactly. Umar's feelings towards Khalid do not change, essentially, And this is not going to be the first time where he wants to remove Khalid or punish him. And Abu Bakr just never does. Abu Bakr sees something in Khalid a little bit differently than Umar does. And maybe it's the example of Muhammad. Maybe he wants someone like this. He knows he needs someone like this, as ruthless as he is, to confront the enemies. Who knows what it is?
Yeah, he realizes Khalid's a very powerful asset.
Yeah. And Khalid successfully won the Ridda Wars by March of 633. The date of March is actually very important here. And he again helped unite the neighboring tribes of Medina under one Islamic state. Khalid gained experience in, navigating multiple armies over long distances to handle different fronts. Again, that's a very important thing for any general to experience if they win.
And that's the interesting thing about the Ridda Wars is you're seeing Khalid use a multiple pronged attack during this campaign, and it's very successful. I mean, with tremendous success, he defeats many of these tribes.
Yeah, it's actually kind of crazy how he did it so quickly as well. And now that the internal conflict has been resolved, it's time to expand, right? A couple months later, May, so 2 months after this all happened, Abu Bakr saw an opportunity to invade the Sassanian Empire. And he trusted Khalid to lead. It's actually pretty funny to say that. Khalid to lead.
Yeah.
And so 2 months, that's really quick,
That's very quick. I mean, considering the fact there needs to be training, military drills, and all that. I mean, it's very soon. Yeah,
he wasted no time and gathered 10,000 soldiers before setting out an eerie letter to the Persian governor, Hormuz, right? And he threatened him with the destruction that was coming his way if he did not surrender in advance.
Now, the interesting thing to mention here is that now the Sassanid Empire, the Persians, they're looking at this threat of the Rashidun Caliphate. They don't view them as a threat yet. So when Khalid throws this threatening message at them, hey, pay the jizya tax, this, and that.
Yeah, I'm going to read that letter too.
And what happens is Hormuz says, this is a joke.
Yeah.
This guy can't be serious. We're much bigger. We're much more wealthier than they are. Basically, says, you know what? I'll meet this guy on the battlefield. I'll take him out, no problem.
Yeah, Khalid starts to march north to Iraq, right? As the Persian governor reads the letter. And this is what the letter says. Look what Khalid wrote him. Quote, submit to Islam and be safe, or agree to the payment of the jizya tax, and you and your people will be under our protection, or else you'll have only yourself to blame for the consequences, for I bring men who desire death as ardently as you desire life.
Yeah, shows you the personality of Khalid. He's, just very, very war-minded.
Yeah, and after reading that fiery letter, kind of crazy, like the government just finds this letter telling them that they're going to have destruction on their hands if they don't, surrender quickly, Hormuz actually shared Khalid's threat with the emperor as he prepared to defend against the threat. The emperor sent out an army to him, and one of the Sassanian Empire's best warriors, Kareen. Right, Kareen was like very famous during these parts. Khalid marched up the Euphrates River and invaded a few small garrisons in 4 different locations, but Hormuz and his 20,000 soldiers await in the city of Kazima, which would be like today's Kuwait. Right?
Yeah, it's just south of the Euphrates River, and it's very far south in Iraq. It's basically at the very southern tip of Iraq.
Yeah, so Hormuz is waiting, right? So there's essentially enough time. He got the letter that this guy's coming. I got my army here that the emperor sent me. Let's wait. But the Muslims should be here already. Where are they? There's no Muslim soldiers in sight. He gets word from one of his scouts. Khalid is in the city of Hufair, 50 miles away.
Which is further north, yeah.
Further north. And he has 18,000 soldiers with him. He got 8,000 soldiers along the way. Hormuz, alerted by this, he sets out to, meet Khalid and confront him all 50 miles away to the next city.
Yeah, he basically tells all his men, pack your bags, we got to move fast.
The battle actually started, essentially, but Hormuz didn't even know, right? He didn't even realize what was going on. Khalid knows that the Persian soldiers were heavily equipped, which made them strong to engage head-on, of course, but also slow to move, right? And it would be exhausting to them to keep marching back and forth. So Khalid is always big on movement, right? Mobility, constant, attacking and defending, all this different stuff, moving different places. I believe even like one of his units.
Yeah, his special forces unit, as he knew it. Now, the Muslims back in the day called it, and they actually have a written text for it, called the Army of Movement. Today, we know it as the Mobile Guard. It was his 4,000 cavalry special forces unit. These guys were the bread and butter, basically, of his army. They're the reason, basically, he was so victorious in so many different battles. They were the anchor, essentially.
Yeah, and he was very big on movement, constant mobility. And Khalid waited at the city of Hufair until his scouts spotted the Persians, and then he and his men ran through the desert to the city of Kazima, which is where Hormuz, that governor, was just at, right? Hormuz, he's at Hufair now, and he's confused. Where are the Muslims, right? They disappear. They're not here anymore. His scouts now tell him, no, Khalid's in Kazima now. He's like, wait, how did they just get there? They're moving so quickly in such little time. Then Hormuz is like, okay, we got to go to there now. We can't have him just keep going back and forth here.
He's taking him. What he's doing is he's taking him for a run. It's a strategy just to wear him out.
Yes, the Persians march back to Kazima, and the reason why Khalid was doing that was just to exhaust them before he actually fights them.
Yep.
And, once they get to Kazima, Khalid is there. He's waiting for them, very patient. Hormuz sees the patient Muslim army and their leader Khalid, and the Persians, exhausted, get into formation, and there's some mistranslation. They say they chained themselves together. This battle is called the Battle of Chains, right? Now,
the whole thing about the Battle of the Chains is there was a misinterpretation of the Persian word Sicilla. Sicilla meant chains, but it was used as a metaphor. One, because if you chain your opponent, if you chain your men together, first off, they can't move. So that's tactically, it's really stupid. Not only that, if the man next to you falls in battle, he dies, you have to carry 150 plus pounds of dead weight on one arm while fighting the guy in front of you.
Yeah.
It was a metaphor. It wasn't literal. The men were not literally chained together. It was just a metaphor to describe how close their unity was.
Yes, exactly. And also, in the battle, they did retreat, but they couldn't do that if they were chained, So it wouldn't even make sense. So they called the Battle of the Chains. There is that mistranslation about, them being actually chained together, like literally.
Yeah, it was just a misinterpretation of the word. That's all.
Exactly. And they stay so close together, it was actually very hard for the cavalry to break through for Khalid. And Khalid purposely positioned his men with the desert behind them. He actually did this very often, right? So he always had an opportunity to flee into the desert if he needed to do that. And he knew no one was going to be able to chase him through the desert.
And the other reason for doing that too is that if he's on a flat desert area, what that does is that gives his cavalry the ability to move.
Yeah.
And that's the advantage that Khalid holds.
And they always create formations with their armies to have a center force and then the wings on the side.
Yeah,
right?
Now throughout basically for most of these battles, that basically for all the way since maybe the time of the Spartans when they were fighting the Persians back in the 5th century BC, you're seeing a traditional layout of war. Center, infantry, the sides, the flanks, the cavalry. Yeah. So even with Khalid, you're seeing that same exact thing.
Yeah, and here's the interesting thing. Hormuz set out a challenge to Khalid for a duel. And I think he did this probably because he understood the exhaustion of his army. So he went out to attack Khalid, or fight Khalid face to face. And Khalid happily accepts, and they surprisingly stalemated, right? Showing that Hormuz is actually a pretty good fighter. But here's the interesting thing. 2 more Persian warriors swoop in, interfering in the duel, and attacked Khalid. And here comes one of Khalid's generals, right? I believe his name was like...
his name was Kaka bin Amr.
Okay, yeah.
Now, this guy, he's a legendary soldier of the time, and he plays another very, very major role in the Battle of Al-Qadisiyah, which Khalid's not involved with, but it's a very, very big battle.
Yeah, so he comes in, charges in, and with Khalid, he kills Hormuz and the 2 Persian warriors, right? Now with no leader for the Persians, Khalid ripped through the front line and slayed many of the Persian soldiers, while others even defected to his side.
Now tactically, here's the dangerous part about doing duels, and this affected the Persians many times in their fight against Khalid. When you do a duel with your champions or with the commander, what happens is if you don't win, that's a huge morale shot to your people.
Yeah.
But remember, and like I mentioned in past episodes, morale is energy. The energy within your army needs to be very high at all times. They need to be ready to fight. And if they see their commander get slain right in front of them, that's a huge blow to their morale.
Yeah.
And that's a huge factor in winning a fight. And that's where Khalid most of the time shines in the battle. He throws his champions out there, or even he himself sometimes.
Yep.
And he kills whoever they throw in front of him, or they kill whoever's in front of them, for example, Persians or Byzantines. And it's a huge morale boost for the Muslims and a big morale shot to the Persians.
Exactly. And the Muslims got a big boost in morale because of that too.
It's a good tactic if you can win.
And during this time, the other Persian commanders of the flanks and the famous warrior Kareen hurried to regroup to the city of Al-Madar. Right, so they ran away, they retreated, and Khalid knew that the Persians would have no time to get ready if he rushed the city immediately, right? He also has the speed advantage, essentially, in a way, if you want to say it that way. Charges in, and with 17,000 men, Khalid arrived and quickly got into formation in what would be called the Battle of River. So from one battle to the next, no time in between.
But just to make things very clear, because the Battle of the River was fought by the Euphrates.
Okay.
So Kazama and Hufair have already been taken by Khalid. So what now, just so everybody understands what's going on here now, when you look at the country of Iraq, Khalid is fighting purposely, intentionally. He's fighting on the southern outside border of Iraq. And he's doing that for 3 reasons. 1, because he has the desert around him. Mm-hmm. 2, he has local Arab tribes, and this is extremely important. A lot of people miss this, is the local Arab tribes offer intelligence and scouts, and because they're loyal to him.
Yeah.
They're his people, so they're loyal to him. And this is huge, huge, huge help for Khalid later on, throughout his campaign throughout Iraq against the Persians. Yeah. And the third thing is, if he goes too deep into Persian territory, for example, central, eastern Iraq, northern Iraq, further, what'll happen is he can't set up his administration. Not only that, it keeps him out of touch with the local Arab tribes. So now so he's purposely staying on the southern outside border. What he wants to do, though, is he wants to take the river crossings. Yeah. So that way, if anybody is to cross, for example, the Persians want to make a crossing, the local Arab tribes let them know, hey, the enemy's coming. So it's very important to note that.
Yeah, and he also mandated for them to act as spies too, which is pretty interesting how, his whole personality into all that. And they get into the Battle of the River, right? The Persians had Kareen, that famous Persian warrior, in the center of their formation and the 2 wings on the sides. The position with the river and the boats behind them allowed them to always have like an opportunity to retreat if they have to go by boat. And the Persians, again, began the battle with a duel. So they began the Battle of the Chains with a duel with their commander. Now they do it again. They didn't learn their mistake. This time, it was Kareen who challenged Khalid to a duel. And as Khalid stepped forward to accept, like out of nowhere, one of his soldiers, his name was Ashi, I'm just going to call him Ashi, I think his last name, rode out to accept the challenge in place of Khalid. And to everyone's surprise, Ashi defeated and killed Kareen. So like...
And the interesting thing was, after he killed him, now this ticked off the Persians. Mm-hmm. So what the Persians ended up doing is now the cavalry commanders on each wing from the Persian side, they came out and had a duel with the Arab commanders. The Persian commanders lost just as well as Kareen's did.
Yep.
So now just so everybody knows, the battle's set up like this. Khalid has his front infantry center, the flanks, the cavalry on the flanks, left and right. Yeah. The Persians have 2 lines of infantry, the front infantry and then the reserve in the back. and then they have the cavalry in the flanks. And then basically what happens from here, after the Muslims win the duel, there's a full frontal charge. But what happens is Khalid now from here, he's not able to get a full decisive win here. So it's kind of like a standstill at first. So as they're fighting as there's a lot of fierce fighting in the middle, what happens is now the Persians, because they have that extra reserve infantry in the back, they have that extra drive. So remember, when you put your army, when you center your infantry deeper as opposed to wider, you have a much more stronger aggressive drive. So they're pushing Khalid's center backwards, and as both sides of infantry are getting tired, what the Persians do now is they replace their tired frontline infantry with the ones that were in reserve in the back. Now what happens after this now is this is where the Persians make the mistake, and Khalid always capitalizes on it. They overcommit. The Persians overcommit, and now what happens from here? They separated from the infantry they just replaced in the back. Now they're not in touch with them anymore now. Khalid sees that. Khalid's flanks smack into the center, destroy the Persian center, and chase off the rest.
And they said, like, how many men were there?
They believe half of the Persian army died that day, and it was roughly around between 15,000 and 25,000.
That's a lot.
That's a lot of people.
And that's right after he just won the battle of the chains as well.
And you see that tactic used a lot here. The enemy overcommits, and then he flanks them on the sides. He flanks their infantry on the sides, their center, and then he chases off the...
It's almost like they're not paying attention to like the strongest part of his army.
Yeah, right? they overcommit to the punch, and he counters them for it.
Yep, exactly. And Khalid was not done. He targeted the next city with 15,000 men. He lost 2,000 there. The Persian emperor got word of the losses against Khalid in such rapid time, too. He lost a governor, and he essentially lost 3 commanders really quickly. The emperor sets out 2 different armies that totaled together of 25,000 soldiers to the city of Walaya or something. Walaja, to wait for Khalid. Khalid has spies in these cities that Jack mentioned earlier, and they're spotting Persian armies coming, like Persian soldiers. And he gets information of their units and notices that his 5,000 strong cavalry outnumbers the Persians. So Khalid splits his cavalry unit and positions them behind a low western ridge at night on the battlefield he's about to get into.
Yeah, and the interesting thing about this is the Persians were notified exactly of how many troops. Their spies told them, hey, Khalid has this many troops in his army.
Yeah.
So and the interesting thing about this now, Khalid in the middle of the night hides his cavalry out in the desert. And so now remember, both of the armies, they're both in an impregnable position. Their backs are towards a ridge. There's a ridge behind the Persian forces, and there's a mountain ridge behind Khalid's forces. Yeah. So they're both in really good position. So when you're in a position that can't be assaulted, you have to draw the enemy out because you can't attack them. And that's where Khalid is smart. So basically, when he sees Khalid's force the next day, when he sees Khalid's force advance, he sees that he's like, wait a minute. Why is Khalid's force much smaller than you reported to me?
Yeah, not as much horsemen.
He's thinking to himself, this is strange. Now, the Persian forces, the Persian commander still made the mistake of engaging in battle. Yeah. He's figured, no, he's much smaller, I can take him out. So as Khalid attacks his position, obviously Khalid is not able to defeat him at this position behind the mountain ridge because the guy has high ground. So Khalid does this on purpose now. He wants to lure the enemy away from that position.
Starts like retreating a little bit in the center.
Yep, he starts slowly retreating the center back. Now this is giving the Persians a false sense of confidence that they're winning the fight. Mm-hmm. So now as the Persians are pressing against Khalid's center,
it creates like a crescent shape.
Yeah, very similar to a crescent shape. And what happens is now as they go, the Persians push really far. Again, they overcommit. So now they're way too far from their camp. Their back is open now. They're nowhere near that mountain that their backs were towards now. Yep. Now Khalid's against the ridge now. That's what Khalid wants. Yep. Then Khalid signals the attack from the horsemen that were out far in the desert that he sent to hide in the middle of the night. They come out and they smack the Persians from the rear, and the Persians are just getting utterly slaughtered.
And he encircles them and successfully executes the famous double envelopment tactic that was used first by Hannibal way back in the day in the Battle of Cannae against the Romans, right?
Now, the interesting thing about this battle, it's not so much of a double envelopment. I get why people say that, but it's more of a hammer and anvil that Alexander the Great used to use. Yeah, so basically, you flank the front and you flank the back.
Okay.
So it was more of a hammer and anvil.
Yeah, I know a lot of the historians say that this is where he successfully used the double envelopment, but I guess it is a little bit different.
You could consider it that, but when you look at it, how it played out, it is more of a hammer and anvil.
Yeah, very, Very well thought out battle from Khalid here.
Very intelligent, very.
And the Persian commander, interesting story here, Persian commander managed to escape this this formation, and he got lost in the desert and died from dehydration, and all the other guys just got slaughtered, right?
Yeah, and another thing I want to mention here, and a lot of people question, why was it that the early Muslim armies during the Rashidun Caliphate, the Abbasid, and the Umayyad Caliphate were so powerful? Why were they so successful? And I'm about to explain right now. So what happened was, when you look at the layout of the Arab armies, the early Muslim armies, you see that they incorporate camels. Now, the importance of a camel, it doesn't have the driving force or even the driving speed that a horse, or that, for example, that a European steed has. But what it is it can attack from angles and move on terrains that a horse can't.
Oh, okay.
So basically, Khalid had a cheat code. Basically, so if you located your city next to a mountain, it's very hard to invade that. But because of these camels and the mobility that Khalid had, he basically could go through these terrains, take all your gold from your city, and ride out.
Yeah.
And you couldn't chase him because you didn't have the mobility he did.
Mm-hmm.
So, and the other thing about the Arab armies, the early Muslim armies, was that this is a detriment to them. This is a negative. So they didn't wear heavy armor.
Yeah.
And the problem with that was, when you don't have heavy armor, when you're under projectile fire, for example, catapults, archers, and things like that, arrow volley, their shields were not that high quality either. So their shields, to a degree, defended it. Mm-hmm. So when the arrows are coming in, you'll see, and we'll explain later in later battles, that a lot of Khalid's losses, a majority of them come from arrow volley, from archers. So they were very mobile, but they didn't have the armor, and they didn't believe in heavy armor so much, the early Muslim armies, was because they lived in the desert. So when you wear this heavy armor, it's bad for mobility, and it's very, very bad because it gets very hot in those areas. And it could cause heat strokes, and it could cause all kinds of just terrible conditions. And that's why the early Muslim armies were so successful, was because they had movement. They had mobility over both Byzantine and Persian armies.
So even against like arrow volleys and stuff like that?
Against arrow volleys, their biggest weakness was against archers.
Yeah.
Archers were their weakness.
Yeah.
But they still made it even
They still were able to win those battles, which is crazy. Khalid at least did.
Khalid, yeah. He still found a way around that.
Yeah, he was undefeated in all of this, which is insane, even with that weakness. And then he sets out this is an interesting thing. So he wins this battle against the Persians here, where he had, successful tactics being used. The commander died in the desert. It's said there's numbers that he killed 20,000 soldiers there, while only losing another 2,000. And he's just killing tens of thousands of soldiers, adding onto each other like this. And it's getting word to the emperor. It's getting word to the entire Persian Empire, Persian army that are around at the time. And he sets out again, they say in the same day, and attack the city of Ulais.
Yes.
Right? The Persians were met with even Arab Christians to stop Khalid's advancement. They camped between the Euphrates River and the Qasif River, I think it's how you pronounce it.
Qasif, yeah.
They say with like 30,000 men. Now the number's going to be kind of skewed, but they say with 30,000 men. So they're like in between the two rivers at a bank, essentially. Between both the banks. Khalid approached them and got into formation. He dueled the commander of the right flank and killed him. And then the battle was fierce afterward and fought for even hours. It was such an intense battle that Khalid said after this, he has never fought an enemy as fierce as the Persians were at the Battle of Ulais.
And he had to, and he actually took a certain amount of time. I don't remember the exact time, but he took a certain amount of time to recuperate and recover. He was like, we can't chase whatever Persians have left off. We're just going to let them go. We need to recover. That was a hard-fought fight.
Very hard fought. Through sheer force, the Muslims were, getting the advantage of the Persian army who retreated. And the Muslims killed so many Persians in that battle that they said the river, the Qasif River, I believe, was turning red. Right?
Yeah, from all the bodies, yeah.
Khalid even ordered his men to announce to the Persians that they would not kill them if they surrender. This is where we get to the ruthlessness of Khalid. So the Persian soldiers started to surrender. Like, okay, if we're going to be okay, if we're going to be all right, we'll surrender to you and we'll convert and, all that stuff. Khalid would capture them and execute them one by one after the other for an entire day and night and dump their bodies into the river. They would call the river afterward the River of Blood because of this.
Yeah, absolutely merciless.
Merciless completely. And again, this is Khalid acting independently, because Abu Bakr and all these guys, they don't want him to do that. Umar doesn't want him to do that. Muhammad would not want him to do that. They want to convert these people. Khalid's like, I have another way to do this.
Yeah, Khalid's like, I got my own way of doing this.
Yep. And they said that Khalid lost another 2,000 men in this battle, but now he controls the city of Ulais now. Khalid orders the people to pay the jizya tax and also mandated them as well to act as spies against the Persians. So he has multiple cities now where he has the people acting as spies, and the Persians don't even know it.
And again, he's purposely staying on that southern border, southern central border, because he knows if he goes too deep into Persian territory, he's not safe.
Exactly. But the thing is, the city of Ulais and the others were not even his main focus. His main focus was the city of Al-Hira, right? Hard for me to pronounce that. A large city of wealth. Right, this is a giant city, a lot of people live there, has a large military, and Khalid quickly attacked, and the city quickly surrendered. So they know at this point his reputation, right? He just defeated all these different cities. He defeated multiple armies that was sent out by the emperor himself, and they know about the jizya tax probably most likely, so they would surrender. Okay, well, if you don't kill us, we'll do the tax and we'll convert and all this stuff. So just like the city of Ulais, the people in Al-Hira were also mandated to act as spies as well. This is a large city.
And this again, like I had mentioned before, this is Khalid setting up his administration. After he conquers a city, he's got to set up his administration, and he can't do that too deep into enemy territory. Yep. So he's very smart about how he's doing this.
And he continues his march. There were sayings that Khalid's horse never rested, neither did his sword. And continue north, plundering villages, approached a city called Ain al-Tamir, which had a garrison.
Yep.
Right? Had a garrison, and Khalid is not used to sieges or any kind of fortification garrison castle to fight against. And the thing is, Khalid dueled their leader, captured him, and literally carried him with his hands around the battlefield, humiliating the enemy Persians, caused them to surrender due to low morale as well. And Khalid then crucified the leader in front of the soldiers of the garrison when they refused to open the gates. Right? There's a lot of mental warfare, him playing with the enemy.
Yeah, it's a lot of morale. It's a big morale war thing.
Exactly. And then we get to the final battle. So he's going battle after battle, city after city. Next one, he targets the Persians, which is also kind of like the beginning, essentially, of an invasion of the Byzantine from Khalid's side.
Yeah.
At the Battle of Firaz. Yep. Right? Not much is actually known about the battle. But the interesting thing is, both the Byzantine and the Sassanian, the Persians, teamed up against Khalid.
Yeah, they allied, yep.
Which is insane.
Yeah, it was an allied force, yep.
And Khalid defeated the combined might of the two powerful armies, using his flanks to surround the enemy.
And the interesting thing about this battle was they were both close to the bridge of the river right there by the Euphrates. So basically, it's like when you're both next to the bridge, it's a standoff essentially. Khalid's army is facing off with the allied force. I'm going to call them the allied because they're Byzantine Persian. So against the allied force. So basically,
and by the way, these two empires were in conflict with each other this whole time.
Yeah, for a quarter of a century they had fought. And what happened was now Khalid, they're facing off at the bridge, and Khalid says, okay, so clearly we're not getting anywhere here. So Khalid purposely, intentionally retreats a little bit. So that way he can give the allied forces room to obviously cross the bridge.
Yeah.
So what he does is as they attack him, they attack his front line. He purposely sends a cavalry unit all the way to the bridge, and he tells them, make sure you capture that bridge. Mm-hmm. So what happened now, the allied forces have no idea he did this. So as they're fighting front line and flanks are fighting, they capture the bridge, that cavalry contingent, and now he signals them. He says, hit them from behind. Again, classic Khalid move. They smack him from the back. And it actually wasn't a big force. It wasn't a very numerous force, but what happened was the allied force, the Byzantine Persians, they had panicked. They saw horsemen coming from behind, and they were like, whoa, where did all these men come from? And it was a lot smaller than the Persians and the Byzantines thought. But once they saw them that the Khalid's army cavalry contingent come from behind, they were like, whoa, how many more does he have behind us? Yeah. So they just instantly panicked and they retreated.
Yeah, which is crazy. And that was pretty much the end of the conquest in Iraq and against the Sassanian Empire from Khalid. And he was called by Abu Bakr to help the Muslims in Syria.
Yeah,
right?
He was given the direct order from Abu Bakr to go against the Byzantine Empire.
Yeah, because the Byzantine, they control Syria at this point. And that's where a lot of the battles happen against the Byzantine. And Khalid, happy to go to the next battle. Let's go, right? He begins to march through the desert with 500 men that they call the Desert March. And he also had 20 camels. And he marched through the desert for 6 days, which is, without water, it seems kind of crazy, along the way. And they said that he used the camels as water storages. So he had them consume more water to storage in their humps, I think it is.
Yeah.
And he also tied their mouths shut to stop them from eating, as it would spoil the water, right? So the camel's not going to have a long time to live without eating and stuff. But what they would do is they would kill the camels whenever they needed to drink something, and their water silks or water skins are out of water. They drink the water from the bodies of the camels, and, if they didn't do this, the desert march would seem like suicide.
Yeah, the human body can go way longer without food than water.
Yeah, it was a crazy thing to do. Imagine, like, you're marching with Khalid or anybody who's marching through the desert. You have to kill your camel and then drink the water from their bodies. Like, from their...
Yeah, they somehow extracted the water from the hump.
Yeah.
And what it was he force-fed those 20 camels. He force-fed them a lot of water so it would last them. And how he was able to calculate, hey, for a whole week, I got to be able to make sure that these 20 camels... I mean, maybe he over-calculated, which is, of course, what you should do, but maybe he over-calculated, who knows. But either way, he force-fed the camels extra water, so that way his men would have both water and meat after they slaughtered the animal.
Yeah, and he makes his way through the desert,
It's a very hard march. And that's another thing that, when you look at war, like we've mentioned in, the episode about Hannibal, it's when you're crossing through tough terrain is where you'll see the discipline of both your men and the leader itself.
Absolutely. And again, they never betrayed Khalid. They never doubted him.
They never mutinied or nothing. They just, they had full belief in him.
Just followed him the whole way through. They said, like, kind of similar to Hannibal, right?
Yeah, very
Hannibal's
similar.
men never wanted to leave him. But Khalid arrived. On his arrival, actually, Abu Bakr makes him the supreme commander. Essentially, is the leader of the military.
Yeah, he's basically what you could consider the shogun of, like, almost like the samurai, like the shogun. That's basically what he is at this point.
Yeah, once he arrives, like, Abu Bakr holds this guy to very high regard because he sees nobody else that's fitting over Khalid to have that title. And there's other commanders there that have been fighting before he got there. They've been fighting the Byzantine in, like, different skirmishes, and they're commanding different armies to handle this. And then once Khalid comes, he's the boss of them all now. He's the commander of them all. And there were a couple guys that, they didn't like that. They didn't agree with that. But Abu Bakr really liked Khalid, and, he trusted in his military prowess to just continue with this invasion or this conquest into the Byzantine Empire. And I believe they set their sights in the capital city of Syria, which is Damascus.
Yes, but just before they go to Damascus, what happens is he conquers these smaller cities after he crosses the Syrian desert. Nothing really significant there, but he conquers them, 2 cities, and then he fights at this battle known as Ajnadain. Now, Ajnadain, the very interesting thing about this battle is you see the struggle that Khalid has against archers now. So what happens here in this battle, he meets up against it's not a Persian force, it's a Byzantine force. Yeah. His Byzantines are up against Khalid now. He goes in there, traditional, get the infantry ready in the center, the archers ready with them, and then the cavalry on the flanks. Same thing with the Byzantines, same setup. As they meet in battle, what happens now is the Byzantine archers are much more experienced and have better equipment than obviously the Arab archers, and it starts killing off and breaking apart the front line of Khalid. And just so everybody knows, whenever the Byzantines and the Persians used to get into arrow volley fights with the early Muslim armies, they would mock the Muslims.
Really?
Because what would happen was the Muslim arrows would bounce off the armors of both the Byzantines and the Persians for the most part. I mean, obviously some people
because of their
died.
armor.
Yeah, the armor was the Byzantine armor and the Persian armor was far better than the Arab armor. No question about it.
They're way more advanced.
And the Persians and the Byzantines would mock them. So at this battle, what happens is now there's a single soldier named Dira. Dira is he's one of the only very few heavily armored Arab soldiers. He grabs one of the Byzantine shields, the heavy shields of the Byzantines, and he charges. He lets out a war cry, and he charges straight into volley fire, and he charges right into the front line of the Byzantine front line. Now, this is a huge, and he's war cry. It's almost like a movie if you think about it.
Scene.
This guy's just charging.
Charges through arrow volleys, insane.
Yeah, and what happens now is...
one of those could just kill him.
Now, that's a huge, again, like we mentioned before, morale. The other Muslim soldiers see this and they're like, look at this guy.
Yeah.
So they charge with him. Now, the whole army advances. So what happens after this, now, Khalid, now he creates this wedge formation, like an arrow point formation in 2 different areas of the front line with his cavalry.
Yeah.
Now, the smart thing here is what it does is it creates a lot of pressure when you attack. So he attacks the Byzantines with this wedge formation, and the Byzantines cannot hold against that kind of pressure because obviously Khalid, with the speed of his horses, they slam right into the front line and they crush the entire army. And I think, if I'm not wrong, in that battle, almost the whole entire army was wiped out.
Really?
Yeah, I mean, he annihilated the Byzantines in that battle.
And that's where he goes to Damascus after, right?
After that, yep, his battle of Damascus, yep.
And he, if I'm not wrong, he attacked Damascus during Easter of 634.
Yes, and the interesting thing about that was Khalid actually initially did not have enough forces to successfully conduct the siege. So what happened was Khalid was smart here. Northeast of Damascus, there's a place called I don't know if they still call it that, but there was a place called Eagle's Pass.
Okay.
Now, Khalid looked at the battlefield and he said this. Obviously, he's a very intelligent tactician. He said, okay, if the Byzantines are going to send reinforcements, they're going to send it through Eagle's Pass because that's the best way to come down, through a mountain's pass. Yeah. And it's to the northeast of Damascus. The leader of Damascus is the Byzantine general Thomas. So what happens is he goes, the Muslim army surrounds the city, but they're stretched out thin because they don't have enough people. But he's trying to make this, basically trying to encircle the whole city of Damascus. Yeah. So what happens is Khalid sends out a small contingent of cavalry up to Eagle's Pass. He says, stay right there in case the Byzantines want to send reinforcements. But Khalid's smart. Khalid knows that that's what they're going to do. That's what Thomas is waiting for. He's waiting for the reinforcements. Yeah. They send reinforcements through Eagle's Pass. That small Arab force says to Khalid, hey, they sent 12,000 guys here. Khalid says, I'm coming right now. Khalid swings on over. Now, the dangerous part here now is he left the siege, that initial siege that he was on with Damascus. So what happens here now is his men are spread really thin now. This is dangerous now. It's very risky. He goes to attack the men that are at Eagle's Pass. He defeats the 12,000 army. He doesn't kill everybody, but he defeats them, and they run off. So now what this does now is Thomas, while he's in Damascus, he finds out about this. He's like, now this, again, it's the morale thing. It's a huge blow to their morale. Huge. Now they're very discouraged now. Discouraged army doesn't fight that strong. Yeah. So Khalid comes back after beating that 12,000 army. Now he's back to the siege. So Khalid initially doesn't have a whole lot of success right here because it's just very back and forth. Yeah. Thomas is in and out of the castle. He's in and out. He's attacking some of the forces, and Thomas actually does pretty good at some points, but he can never break the siege. So Thomas eventually hides into the city again. Thomas lost a lot of men. Mm-hmm. He's been trying to fight so long. The arrow volley's not really doing it right now, and Thomas doesn't really know what to do. They're discouraged too because they're not getting any help. And Damascus is a very strategic point for the Byzantine Empire.
It's the capital of Syria.
Yeah, so I mean, if you lose that, that's a big deal. And so what happens here now is Khalid is struggling as well because sieges are very difficult. They are very, very, they require a lot of manpower, supplies, resources. It's very hard. So what happens here now, according to Arab sources, on September 18th, there is a Greek civilian inside of Damascus. His name was, the Arab accounts say, Jonah the Lover.
Oh, okay.
So what happens here is he comes out, he sneaks out of the city, and he says, look, tomorrow there's going to be a Christian religious ceremony. The eastern gate is not going to be blocked. There's not going to be anybody there. You might have a few guards, but that's just about it. Yeah. He says, that's going to be your time to attack. And basically, now they don't trust him at first.
And he's one of the Byzantine guys.
Why are you telling us this?
And he comes to their camp. How can you trust this guy?
And now they don't trust, so they interrogate him as the story goes. And he says, how can we make truth of what he's telling us? He says, they did not allow me to get married to my fiancée. The Byzantines told this guy, you are not allowed to get married. We are under siege. You're going to have to wait. The marriage is going to have to wait. And he was actually butthurt from this. Yeah. He was legitimately butthurt that he couldn't get married.
At this time. Later, yeah, but not now.
He was legitimately butthurt. Yeah. And he goes and tells Khalid, the eastern gate is going to be wide open for you. Just build a ladder up the walls in the middle of the night.
He betrayed them so bad.
Thousands of people were killed and sold into slavery because of what this one guy did.
Yeah, the lover.
And Khalid actually himself was one of the first people to climb the siege ladder, as they call them. In the middle of the night, they kill the couple guards that were guarding the eastern gate. Yeah. Khalid pops the doors open. He says, come on in. The Muslim army floods right in, and they're just massacring their way halfway through the city until one of the Arab Muslim generals says, Abu Ubaida is his name. He says, stop, Khalid. Leave it be. Now, don't kill the rest of these people, he tells Khalid. Khalid is furious. Khalid is mad. Khalid is like, no, there is no mercy here. We need to destroy everybody. They put up a very fierce resistance, destroy everybody. But eventually he ends up listening to Abu Ubaidah, which he truly did not want to.
Yeah.
And then that is how Khalid won the siege of Damascus.
Which is crazy.
All because of one person betraying the entire city, sold out everybody, just because he was butthurt that the Byzantines were not allowing him to get married in the middle of a battle.
Yeah. I wonder what happened to him.
He eventually converted to Islam and then, I believe, lived in Arabia, if I'm not wrong.
Okay, that makes sense. And then where did they go from there? Because, this is like the beginning, right, of the battle against the Byzantine, but they just took over the capital of Syria.
Yeah, so now after they take Damascus now, there's the Battle of Pella.
Okay.
So now the Battle of Pella now is further north. So what happens the Byzantines are in a problem now.
Yeah.
The Byzantine Emperor Heraclius, he's suffering from a brain edema. A brain edema is the same thing that kills Bruce Lee. Basically, a swelling of the brain lining.
Oh, okay.
And that's what he's suffering from right now. So it's very hard. The empire is in bad shape right now. So at the Battle of Pella, what happens is there's a city next to Pella called Byzantine.
Mm-hmm.
The Byzantines hold that city. So that's just a little bit further northwest of Pella. So what happens is Khalid wants Byzantine. So Khalid goes through this area, and it's the first time you see Khalid go through a marshy, swamp, murky area.
Mm-hmm.
Khalid, as soon as he runs into it, he's like, whoa, we can't go through here. His men and his horses actually get stuck in the mud. And he goes, we got to pull out. So they pull out, and then they go further north to Pella again. So then the Byzantines are like, now's the chance to attack. They go and try to attack. It's a night raid, though. The Byzantines try to attack Khalid at night.
Mm-hmm.
So what happens now is they're fighting in the middle of the night, and now the Byzantines are unable to break the Muslim forces. They're unable to. So Khalid, eventually, they break through through the Byzantine line, and then the Byzantines are running away. But Khalid is merciless, as we had mentioned before.
Yeah.
Khalid chases them down and just starts slaughtering them one by one, and very few escaped. Khalid only lost 235 guys in that battle.
Really?
The Byzantines lost, I believe, 10 to 15,000.
Oh my gosh, that's insane.
And again, it's this tactical mind that Khalid has, and he's on point with everything. He's prepared for everything, and only reason why he knew the Byzantines were coming to attack him at night was simply because of his scouts. Mm-hmm. Again, it's the intelligence. It's that the scouts are intelligence. They're intel. They let you know who's coming, when they're coming, where they're coming from.
Yeah. He dots all his I's, cross all of his T's. He knows exactly what he's doing at every single turn and knows how to engage all of his enemies, even without even before battles, with the spies and everything like that. It's actually extremely intelligent.
And the interesting thing here, after the Battle of Pella, Syria is at the mercy of Khalid now.
Yeah.
All of Syria. And Heraclius, the emperor, says this. He's basically like, we're in a bad spot now. Mm-hmm. So what he does is he gathers a massive, massive, massive army. 5 different generals, and he sends them. Now, he doesn't send them to go attack Khalid directly, not yet. He sends them down the very western part of the Levant, so close to the Mediterranean Sea, closer, because that's where the Byzantines control that area. They control all seaports. Khalid gets word of this. So Khalid moves further south. South to the Yarmouk River.
Oh, okay.
So now we're getting to by far the most famous battle and the most important battle of Khalid's career. Yeah. And even the most important battle, I argue, in all of Islamic history. So
and also to take note, Abu Bakr is dead at this point.
Yes.
Yeah, he died. Umar now takes over as the new caliph, the new leader.
And interesting now that we've mentioned this, what Umar does now, Umar is now very hands-on with the military now. Yeah. Umar's like, I'm not going to do what Abu Bakr did and just sit back and just let things happen. Umar personally, now he does reforms in the military. What he does is he sends informants in the military. Basically, these informants are saying, hey, we need to know everything what's going on here so we can report it back to Umar.
Yeah.
So now what happens now, at this same exact time, Umar demotes Khalid for the first time. He demotes him.
Before the Battle of Yarmouk, huh?
Yeah. But here's the thing Abu Ubaidah did, though. And a lot of people don't know this. Abu Ubaidah told Khalid this. He said, look, I received a message from the caliph. He said, you're being demoted. But here's what we're going to do. I'm in battle. I'm gonna take the credit because he gave me Supreme Commander title. The title of Supreme Commander.
Yeah.
But I want you making all the moves on the battlefield. I want you moving men. I want you taking control. I'm going to take all the credit just so you don't get in trouble. Because I know how capable you are.
Yeah.
So Abu Ubaidah is doing Khalid a big favor here.
Yeah.
So Umar now, but they got to be careful now because Umar's informants are all over the military now. So Abu Ubaidah has got to watch his back too now. Mm-hmm. So now as those forces, the Byzantine forces are heading south, and as Khalid's heading south to the Yarmouk River, this is where the famous battle happens. Mm-hmm. The famous Battle of Yarmouk. This battle right here is the most important battle by far, most important event in Khalid's life.
Yeah.
So what happens here now is Khalid, now the Byzantine army is said to be anywhere between 15 to 150,000 men.
Yeah, it's a wide range.
It's a very wide range, but just so everybody gets a quick note of how big the Byzantine army might have actually been, Heraclius during his war against the Persians, which was about 20-something years before this, he fielded about 70,000 men at absolute maximum. So is it possible he could have fielded 150? It's possible, but it's not likely.
Yeah.
So, but either way, the army's massive.
Yeah, it's a huge army.
It reasonably ranges from 30 to about, I'd say, 85,000.
Yeah.
And most accounts agree with that. So,
and Khalid's forces, or Abu Ubaida's forces, is like 25,000 or something around there.
Yeah, 25, 30, roughly around there. And usually, Khalid usually stays around there, between 20 and 30,000.
Yeah.
He doesn't really go much more than that. So at this battle's a 6-day battle. It's a huge fight, basically. It starts off traditional formation. Infantry in the center, cavalry in the sides. But the forces are big, though. You have multiple lines of infantry. It's not just one line. You have a first line, a second line, and a third line. So the battle starts like this. The Byzantines attack on Khalid's right side, which is the Byzantines' left flank. So the Byzantine left flank attacks Khalid's right. No real damage. It's kind of a stalemate. They fight for a little bit. Nothing serious happens. They withdraw. That's day one. Now we get into day two. Both flanks, from both the right and the left Byzantine flanks, charge and attack Khalid's flanks. Now Khalid's forces get pushed back, but again, Khalid's forces are offering a hard counterattack. So it's a stalemate. There's no serious fighting going on. So what happens now is he sees that the Byzantines want to attack the flanks first. So let's keep that in mind. The third day, the Byzantines again attack Khalid's right flank. So what happens is they start pushing. They start pushing further and further. And what happens is Khalid basically now sees that his left flank or Khalid's right flank is starting to break under pressure because now the arrow volley too. So Khalid basically, as the Byzantines are pushing further and further, the Byzantines kind of, again, they overcommit.
Yeah.
This is where Khalid starts routing not the entire flank, but he starts to surround a portion of the flank and he starts killing them. So now the Byzantines realize that they're in a bad spot. So the Byzantines back off. They're like, well, we don't want to get completely encircled, surrounded, or else we'll get killed. So that's day 3. Now, day 4 is where, basically, this is where the serious damage happens now. Khalid realizes that they want to attack the flanks. Abu Ubaida tells him, you can't let them do this to the flanks. Khalid realizes his defensive maneuver is not working now. Because if they attack again like that, the battle's over. Khalid loses. So on day 4 now, basically, it's the same thing. It's a very hard-fought battle, and now the women from the camp are even, they get, the Khalid's army gets pushed so far back that even the women are even getting involved now. The wives of the men.
Yeah.
And they're even, the wives of the men, they say, were even calling their husbands cowards at some point.
Because they're getting pushed back so hard.
Yeah, they're like, how could you let them do this to you?
Yeah.
So it's almost like, now there's that morale factor again.
Yeah.
So after the Byzantines are unable to basically it was another unsuccessful day. Day 5 now, what happens here now is, the Byzantines push further back again against Khalid. Yeah. This time, it's looking really seriously bad for Khalid now. Khalid, a lot of his forces are breaking under pressure, but so are the Byzantines. The Byzantines are very worn out. So it's the same thing. It's a full army charge. So Khalid, after that, the 5th battle ends again in like another stalemate. But more in favor of Khalid because the Byzantine left flank is weakened. So what happens, Khalid does this now. Khalid says, okay, they want to attack the right flank. So Khalid makes a huge right flank. He concentrates most of his forces on the right flank. So the next day, the 6th and final day, the Byzantines attack, an all-out attack. Left flanks, center, everybody's attacking. But now, here's the problem. The Byzantine flank, the Byzantine general set it up wide. He didn't set it up deep. Khalid set it up deep. So what happens is now Khalid's forces are concentrated. The Byzantines' flanks are stretched. Khalid smashes through the Byzantine left flank. Completely smashes through it. And now what happens is now they're open from the left side now. Yeah. He just swarms in on the center and just starts annihilating the infantry. And then the right, Khalid's left flank is attacking the Byzantine right, and they start smashing through Byzantine right flank. And the Byzantines just withdraw, and it is just a horrible, horrible mess.
Yeah, it's the greatest victory for Khalid in his entire military career.
And this battle right here, why it's so important is because And oh, by the way, the numbers, they say the Byzantines lost between 40 and 50,000.
Yeah. I read 40,000 men they lost in that battle.
An enormous amount. Huge.
And I think they said Khalid lost 4,000.
Yeah, Khalid only lost, it was basically like 10 to 1.
Yeah, and like the biggest confrontation with the Byzantine Empire, and that's how badly he won at the end there. Like, or how not easily, but like how devastatingly he won.
This battle right here was the single most important event in Khalid's life and for future Islamic empires, because what the Battle of Yarmouk did was it opened the way for Islam to spread north into Turkey and into the other eastern parts of the Byzantine Empire. Yep. This is by far the most important event I argue, in Islamic history.
Yep. And 3 commanders under the Byzantine Empire died in that battle. Even Theodore Tritherius, I think I pronounce his name, who was like one of the leading generals in the army, which is a devastating win for Khalid at the time.
Oh, an enormous win for Khalid. And then shortly after that, the Byzantine Emperor is just in complete shambles. Yeah. He doesn't know what to do now. He's just like, and when you take a loss that big, you don't recover right away. Mm-hmm. I mean, he took his time to reconsider and replan and reorganize everything. And then there was the siege of Jerusalem that also happened too. Now, this was not really a siege. Yeah. Jerusalem wasn't a siege. So basically, when Khalid went to Jerusalem, the leader of the city at the time, Sophronius, and the importance of this siege is that it's a very important religious center for the Byzantines. So when the leader of the Jerusalem, named Sophronius, was there, he basically tells him, look, I don't want to talk to anybody unless it's Umar, the caliph. He's the only one I want to do negotiations with. Now, the other people in Khalid's army told him, look, you look like Umar. You look a lot like him. Go ahead and talk to him. So Khalid said, okay, I'll try it. Khalid walked up to the castle to talk to Sophronius, and Sophronius said, you're Khalid, you're not Umar. Everybody knew who Khalid was.
Everyone knows who you are, man.
They recognized Khalid, so that failed for Khalid. So Umar himself actually rode up to Jerusalem. Sophronius met with Umar, and basically they made a deal to where they can capture the city. And there was no real siege, but the Islamic force did take Jerusalem. Yeah. And then basically this is all happening at around 636 to 637. Yeah. And what you're seeing here now is because of Khalid, so much territories from Iraq, Northern Arabia, the Levant, Syria, Palestine, Israel, so many areas were conquered, and it's just he was absolutely flawless. I mean, he never lost a single battle.
Never lost a single battle. And was there anything, or he retired, or not retired? He got fired, right?
Yeah, he basically what happened was in 638, the year 638, Umar called him back to Mecca. Yep. And he says, look, I'm relieving you of your duty, basically. You no longer are going to participate in the military. He tells them, his exact words were this, you have done that which no man has done. Mm-hmm. And that's when he tells Khalid, go live off into those areas you conquered in southern Turkey, up by the Taurus Mountains, up by Antioch and those places. Yeah. And he told them, stay up there. I'm relieving you of your duty. You've done well. Thank you for your contribution. These last 4 years, because he dies in 642, from 638, 9, all the way to 42, are his worst years. These are his worst years.
Yeah, without fighting.
And he even says it too. He has a little way of saying, like, I'd rather be on the battlefield facing death than having to sit at home in the comfort of my own couch.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Like, peace, just sitting home, doing nothing for him was horrible. It was a nightmare. He wanted to be on the battlefield.
It's crazy because you see, when you read his life, you see all these events happening, battle after battle, war, campaigns, and then 638 to 642, those last, basically, like...
Nothing.
Absolute nothing. There's no accounts on it. All is just basically, it's like he almost went into depression.
Yeah, and he's also hearing about his comrades essentially, invading here, attacking here, conquesting here, and he's not part of it the whole time.
Yeah, and especially the conquests that were going on in Egypt and in North Africa.
Oh, he would have loved to have been there.
Those were huge battles going on, and Khalid is just, you can imagine that he's just suffering at home.
Yeah, and they said when Umar pretty much fired him, there's different accounts for the motive as to why he did it. Mm-hmm. Like the religious one is different than the historical one, depends on where you're reading it. A lot of historians do say that Umar relieved him of his duties because he feared Khalid was developing a cult of personality. Like there was like not an uprising, but like essentially like a group of the Muslims that were looking up to him so much that they would follow him to no end, And Umar wanted it to be about God. That's what he said. He said he wanted it to be about God, not about Khalid, right? So he kind of feared Khalid's reputation, right? And, you could even argue at a certain point, if Khalid continued, he would have grown to be even more famous or have a bigger following than even Umar did, right? Or at least, you can argue so.
Yeah, and it was that he had that megalomaniac type of aura around him.
Yeah, and there was I think he was an historian. I forgot who exactly, but his name was Saif ibn Umar, right? He said about this whole thing, he said, quote, captivated by illusions on account of him, Khalid, and he feared they would disproportionately place their trust in him rather than God, right? This is what Umar essentially feared. But again, religious accounts and historical different texts, it depends on where you're reading it when you're looking at the motives and stuff like that.
Right.
But yeah, that was pretty much the end of Khalid. He died in 642 AD in Medina, and he definitely did not want to be there. In fact, he had a quote on his deathbed about this whole thing, how depressing it was. So this is what Khalid says on his deathbed. He says, quote, I fought in so many battles seeking martyrdom that there is no spot in my body left without a scar or a wound made by a spear or a sword. And yet here I am dying on a bed like an old camel. May the eyes of cowards never rest. Unquote.
Yeah.
He was mad.
You could tell his last years were not fun.
Yeah.
For him, at least.
And it just goes back to show you about, what I said in the beginning. He'd rather be in the battlefield than even the best news he can hear about, with wives, and he had on a wedding day or having a newborn son. He would rather be fighting an enemy in the icy cold night waiting for them instead of, any of the other stuff.
Yeah. Yep.
And that's pretty much the end of this episode of Khalid ibn al-Walid. The next one, we're going to be doing Vlad the Impaler, right? We're going to get into that whole time period in, you would count that medieval, right?
Yes, late medieval. Yep.
Late medieval times. So we'll see you guys there. And actually, we're going to go to Patreon. So if you guys want to subscribe to Patreon, you can hear the rest of this. We're going to be talking about more of our opinions about the whole Khalid stuff and everything that was happening around that region, as well as others. So we'll see you guys there.